I never thought the words, family only, could destroy someone so completely. But when my sister Belle used them to break my 6-year-old daughter's heart, she set in motion a chain of events that would cost her everything she'd ever wanted. The Florida sun was merciless that August afternoon when I picked up Hazel from the airport. My parents and Belle were still gushing about their wonderful family vacation at the resort, showing me photos on their phones of pristine pools and sunset dinners. Ryan, Belle's 8-year-old son, kept glancing at Hazel with this strange mixture of smugness and guilt that I couldn't quite place. My daughter stood pressed against my leg, unusually quiet, her small hand gripping mine so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Belle was radiant in her expensive sundress, her highlighted hair perfectly tousled in that effortless way that actually took hours of effort. She'd always been the golden child, the one who was going to make it big in the film industry, the one my parents had poured their retirement savings into supporting. I was just Dana, the practical one, the one who'd built a tech consulting business from nothing while raising Hazel alone after my divorce from Spencer. We'd only recently reconciled, and he'd stayed behind in Boston to handle some work emergencies while I dealt with what was supposed to be a joyful family reunion. The drive home from Logan Airport felt endless. Hazel sat in her car seat staring out the window, not chattering about her trip the way I'd expected. No excited stories about the pool or the beach or the special kids menu at the resort restaurant. Just silence, heavy and wrong. It wasn't until we got home, until I'd carried her luggage upstairs and started unpacking her little suitcase, that she finally spoke. I found her sitting on the edge of her bed, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, and tears streaming down her face. "Baby, what's wrong?" I knelt in front of her, brushing her hair back from her forehead. What came out, haltingly, between sobs, made my blood run cold. On the second night of the trip, after dinner, Belle had wanted adult time in the hotel suite. Hazel had been watching cartoons in the living room area when Belle came out, grabbed her by the arm, and pushed her into the hallway. Not roughly enough to leave bruises, but firmly enough to make it clear this wasn't a request. "The room is just for family, Hazel," Belle had said, her voice cold and final. "Go be quiet somewhere else." Then she'd locked the door. My 6-year-old daughter had stood in that hotel hallway, barefoot on the cold marble floor, for 3 hours. She'd knocked softly at first, then sat with her back against the wall, drawing her knees to her chest, trying to be so quiet, so good, so that maybe they'd let her back in. Other guests had walked past. A housekeeper had even stopped, looking concerned, but Hazel had been too scared to ask for help, afraid that if she made trouble, she'd never be allowed back. Inside, she could hear laughter. Ryan's voice, my parents' voices, Belle's theatrical laugh, the TV playing some movie, the sound of room service being delivered. They were having a party, a family gathering, and she wasn't family enough to be part of it. When they finally opened the door, it was my mother who found her, curled up asleep on the hallway floor. "Oh, sweetie, what are you doing out here?" she'd said, as if Hazel had wandered out on her own. Belle had appeared behind her, and the look she'd given my daughter had made it crystal clear that if Hazel told the truth, things would get worse. So she hadn't told. She'd just nodded when my mother assumed she'd gotten confused about which room was theirs. She'd climbed into the rollaway bed in my parents' room and pretended to sleep while listening to Belle and Ryan laughing in the suite next door. As Hazel told me this story, her voice breaking, her small body shaking, something inside me fractured and then reformed into something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous than I'd ever been before. This wasn't the first time Belle had been cruel to Hazel. There had been the birthday party where Belle had forgotten to save Hazel a piece of cake. The Christmas where all the presents under the tree had been for Ryan, and Belle had laughed it off as, "We thought you'd bring Hazel's gifts separately." The constant comments about how Hazel needed to be quieter, better behaved, less needy. But this was different. This was calculated cruelty. This was a grown woman punishing a child for the crime of existing. I held my daughter until she fell asleep, her tear-stained face finally peaceful. Then I went downstairs, poured myself a glass of wine I wouldn't drink, and stared at my phone for a long time. Spencer called around 9 that evening. "How was the reunion?" he asked, his voice warm. "We need to talk," I said, and I told him everything. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Spencer had always been even-tempered, the calm to my occasional storm, but when he spoke again, his voice was pure steel. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but whatever it is, it needs to be permanent. I can't keep exposing Hazel to this." "Whatever you decide," he said quietly, "I'm with you, completely." After we hung up, I sat in the dark living room of our Brookline brownstone and thought about everything I'd sacrificed for my family over the years. The money? Certainly. Belle's rent for the past 3 years while she pursued her dreams in LA. The $50,000 I'd invested in her film project that had never materialized. The car I'd co-signed for that she'd totaled and never paid the insurance deductible on. My parents' mortgage payment when Dad had lost his job, even though I'd been 7 months pregnant with Hazel at the time and barely scraping by myself. But it wasn't just money. It was the emotional labor, the midnight phone calls when Belle had a crisis, the constant reassurance that yes, she was talented, yes, she'd make it big, yes, everyone else was just jealous. The holidays where I'd bitten my tongue when Belle made snide comments about my little consulting business compared to her artistic vision. The family dinners where my accomplishments were glossed over in 30 seconds, while Belle's latest audition was dissected for an hour. I'd told myself it was what families did. They supported each other. They made sacrifices. They stayed loyal. But somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten to ask myself what I was getting in return. And more importantly, I'd failed to protect my daughter from people who should have loved her unconditionally. The next morning, I called Belle. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. Belle, we need to talk about what happened with Hazel at the resort. There was a pause. Then, incredibly, she laughed. Oh my God, Dana, did she actually tell you about that? I thought she'd have more sense. Look, she was being disruptive. We needed some quiet time. It's not a big deal. You locked my 6-year-old daughter out of the hotel room for 3 hours, I said, my voice eerily calm. She was barefoot. She was crying. She fell asleep on the floor in the hallway. Don't be so dramatic. She was fine. Honestly, Dana, you coddle that child way too much. Maybe if you disciplined her properly, she wouldn't be such a burden when other people try to spend time with her. That word. Burden. As if my brilliant, sweet, funny daughter was something to be tolerated rather than cherished. Let me be very clear, Belle. What you did was child abuse. And I have every intention of making sure it never happens again. Her tone shifted then, from dismissive to venomous. Oh please, child abuse? You're going to play that card? You want to know the truth, Dana? You and that brat have always been a burden on this family. Mom and Dad spent their whole lives cleaning up after you. Your divorce, your struggles, your constant need for validation. At least I'm trying to make something of myself. At least I have ambition beyond running some boring tech company. My boring tech company that's been paying your rent for 3 years? That's what family does, she snapped. They support each other's dreams, but I guess you wouldn't understand that, would you? You've always been jealous of me, of my talent, of the fact that Mom and Dad actually believe in what I'm doing. I could have pointed out that believing in her meant I was the one writing checks. I could have reminded her that my boring tech company had just landed a 7-figure contract with a major healthcare system, but I was done arguing. I'm gonna say this once, Belle. Stay away from my daughter. Stay away from me. We're done. You can't just cut us off. Mom and Dad will never allow it. Watch me, I said, and ended the call. My parents called within the hour, my mother's voice high and anxious. Dana, honey, Belle says you're upset about something that happened on vacation. I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Mom, did you know Belle locked Hazel out of the hotel room? Well, I knew Hazel was in the hallway, but Belle said she just needed a moment of quiet. You know how energetic Hazel can be. She's 6 years old, Mom. She's supposed to be energetic, and Belle didn't need a moment. She locked her out for 3 hours. My father got on the line then. Dana, I think you're overreacting. Your sister would never intentionally hurt Hazel. You know how she is. She just gets overwhelmed sometimes. And frankly, you can be oversensitive when it comes to parenting criticism. Oversensitive. That's what they'd always told me when I'd complained about Belle's treatment of Hazel. When I'd mentioned that Belle forgot to invite us to Ryan's birthday parties. When I'd pointed out that Belle only called when she needed money. Dad, I need you to hear me. What Belle did was cruel and unacceptable. And the fact that neither of you see a problem with it tells me everything I need to know about where your priorities lie. That's not fair, Dana. We love Hazel. You love the idea of her. But when it comes down to it, you'll always choose Belle. You always have. My mother started crying then, which was her usual tactic. How can you say that? We've always tried to be fair to both of you. Fair. The word was almost funny. Fair would have been them noticing that I'd taken out student loans while they paid for Belle's private arts college. Fair would have been them contributing to Hazel's education fund instead of Belle's failed film ventures. Fair would have been them standing up for my daughter when she was being excluded and mistreated. But I was done trying to make them see it. I'm not discussing this further. I just wanted you to know that I'm cutting off all financial support to Belle, effective immediately. And I'm establishing some firm boundaries about contact with Hazel. You can't do that, my father said. Your sister is depending on that money. She'll lose her apartment. Then I guess she'll need to get a job like the rest of us, I said, and hung up. Over the next 2 days, I sat at my computer and methodically canceled everything. The auto pay for Belle's rent, the investment account I'd set up for her film projects, the credit card I'd added her to for emergencies that she'd used for designer handbags and spa days, the tuition payments I'd been making for Ryan's private school, because Belle had convinced my parents she couldn't afford it on her irregular income from auditions. Every click of the mouse felt like cutting a rope that had been strangling me. Every canceled payment was a weight lifted off my shoulders. My phone blew up with messages. First from Belle, angry and entitled. How dare you? We had an agreement. Then from my parents, pleading and accusatory in equal measure. You're being cruel. You're abandoning your family. You'll regret this. But I didn't regret it. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Spencer came home that weekend. We sat Hazel down and explained, in age-appropriate terms, that we were going to be spending less time with Aunt Belle and Grandma and Grandpa for a while, that it wasn't her fault, that she was loved and safe and never, ever a burden. She looked at me with those big, solemn eyes and said, "Because of what happened at the hotel?" "Partly," I admitted, "but also because Daddy and I realized that some people in our family weren't treating you the way you deserve to be treated, and our job is to protect you." She thought about this for a moment. Then she said, "Aunt Belle was mean to me a lot. I thought I was supposed to just be nicer so she'd like me." My heart broke all over again. Oh, baby, you don't have to earn people's love by being perfect. People who really love you will love you exactly as you are. Spencer wrapped his arms around both of us. "Your mom's right, and we're going to make sure you're surrounded by people who see how special you are." I thought that would be the end of it, that Belle would be angry, my parents would be disappointed, but eventually everyone would move on. I'd severely underestimated my sister's capacity for vindictiveness. 2 weeks later, Belle struck back. She posted a video on social media, carefully edited and scored with manipulative music, telling a story about how her wealthy, successful sister had abandoned the family out of spite. She painted herself as the struggling artist, just trying to make ends meet, who'd been cut off without warning by her cruel corporate sister. She included photos of Hazel, carefully blurred but still recognizable, implying that I was neglecting my daughter in favor of my career. The video went viral in certain circles. Suddenly, I was getting messages from strangers calling me heartless. Industry contacts were asking uncomfortable questions. One of my company's potential clients mentioned they'd seen some concerning things online about my character. Belle had carefully crafted the narrative to make herself the victim and me the villain. She twisted every fact, omitted every context, and presented herself as a devoted aunt who just wanted what was best for her niece but had been shut out by a jealous, vindictive sister. When I saw the video, my first instinct was panic. My second was rage. My third, after I'd calmed down enough to think clearly, was calculation. I called my attorney, a sharp woman named Sarah Collins who'd helped me navigate the legal aspects of my business. "Sarah, I need help with a personal matter." She met me in her downtown Boston office the next morning. I showed her Belle's video, explained the full context, and provided documentation of every payment I'd made to Belle over the years, every manipulative text message, and a written statement from Hazel about what had happened at the resort. Sarah watched the video twice, her expression growing colder each time. "Your sister isn't just trying to damage your reputation," she said. "She's engaged in commercial defamation and potentially child exploitation. She's using your daughter's image without permission to support false claims that could harm your business. This is serious. Can we stop her? We can do better than that. We can make sure she never tries this again." Sarah leaned forward. "Here's what I recommend. We send a cease and desist, backed by the threat of lawsuits for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and misuse of a minor's image. We demand removal of all content, a public retraction, and a legally binding agreement that she will never discuss you or Hazel publicly again. And we make it clear that if she refuses, the consequences will be financially devastating." "What about my parents? They've been enabling this behavior for years." "If they've been party to any of the harassment or defamation, we can include them in the action. But my suggestion is to focus on Belle. She's the primary actor here." Over the next week, Sarah built a case that was airtight and merciless. We had screenshots of everything Belle had deleted, testimony from the housekeeper at the resort who'd witnessed Hazel in the hallway, financial records showing the extent of Belle's dependence on my support, and even messages from Belle's own friends expressing concern about her treatment of Hazel. The meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday afternoon at Sarah's office. Belle showed up in full dramatic mode, designer sunglasses, artfully distressed jeans, and an expression of wounded nobility. My parents flanked her, looking uncomfortable but defiant. Sarah didn't waste time on pleasantries. She laid out the evidence, point by point, in a tone that could have frozen fire. Belle's confident expression began to crack around the edges. "Miss Belle Harrison," Sarah said, using Belle's full name with clinical precision. "Your video contains demonstrably false claims about your sister. You've used her daughter's image without consent to support a narrative designed to harm Miss Dana Harrison's professional reputation. You've implied child neglect where none exists. These actions constitute defamation, commercial disparagement, and exploitation of a minor." "I was just telling my truth," Belle said, but her voice wavered. "Your truth is provably false. We have documentation of every financial transaction Miss Harrison made on your behalf. We have testimony from witnesses at the resort. We have your own text messages, admitting to what you did to Hazel. If this goes to court, you will lose. And the judgment against you will be substantial enough to bankrupt you and destroy any chance you have of a career in the entertainment industry." My mother gasped. You can't threaten her like this. It's not a threat, Mrs. Harrison. It's a statement of fact. Your daughter has committed actionable torts. The question is whether she wants to resolve this quietly or publicly. Sarah slid a document across the table. Here are our terms. Miss Belle Harrison will immediately remove all content referencing Dana or Hazel Harrison from all platforms. She will post a retraction stating that her previous video contained inaccuracies and was posted in anger. She will sign a legally binding non-disparagement agreement, promising never to publicly discuss the Harrison family again. She will have no contact with Hazel Harrison except at events where both parties are independently invited, and even then, only supervised contact. And she will acknowledge, in writing, that all financial support from Dana Harrison was a gift, not a loan or obligation, and that its cessation is entirely within Dana's rights. And if I refuse? Belle asked, though we could all hear the defeat in her voice. Then we file suit tomorrow. Your social media posts become evidence. The housekeeper testifies. Your friends testify about your treatment of Hazel. The financial records become public. Every potential employer or collaborator in the entertainment industry will have access to the full story. And when we win, which we will, you'll owe damages substantial enough to force you into bankruptcy. Your aspirations of a film career will be finished before they truly begin. I'd stayed quiet throughout this exchange, but now I leaned forward. Belle, you've spent your entire life thinking you're the special one, the talented one, the one who deserves everyone's support and sacrifice. You convinced yourself that my success was luck and your struggles were noble. But the truth is, you're not a struggling artist. You're a grown woman who's been living off your sister's hard work while treating her daughter with contempt. You thought you could use Hazel as a weapon to manipulate me, to punish me for daring to set boundaries. But I'm not the doormat you thought I was. Sign the agreement, Belle. It's the best deal you're going to get. The room was silent. My father looked like he wanted to argue but didn't know where to start. My mother was crying quietly, finally realizing perhaps that her golden child wasn't quite so golden after all. Belle signed. Her hand shook as she wrote her name, and I saw something I'd never seen before in my sister's face: genuine fear of consequences. Sarah made copies, notarized everything, and escorted Belle and my parents out. Before they left, my mother turned to me. How can you be so cold to your own family? Family doesn't lock 6-year-olds in hallways, I said. Family doesn't exploit children to win internet arguments. Family doesn't take and take and take and then play victim when the well runs dry. You made your choice, Mom. You chose Belle's feelings over Hazel's safety. Now you get to live with the consequences. After they left, Sarah poured us both a glass of whiskey. How do you feel? Honestly, I feel free. The fallout was swift and comprehensive. Belle had to post her retraction, which she did with obvious reluctance and minimal sincerity. But it didn't matter. The damage to her reputation was done. Word spread in the small, interconnected world of independent film that Belle Harrison was difficult and litigious, and not worth the drama. Opportunities dried up. Her husband, a wannabe producer who'd only married her for her connections and the financial support I'd been providing, filed for divorce within 3 months. He'd already been having an affair with an actress on a web series, and with Belle's prospects dimming and my money gone, there was no reason for him to stay. The custody battle was brief. Belle's erratic finances, her history of poor judgment, and the documented incident at the resort all worked against her. She got supervised visitation with Ryan every other weekend. I heard through the grapevine that Ryan, who'd always been a bit of a bully like his mother, blamed Belle for the disruption in his life and made the visits as unpleasant as possible. Belle ended up moving back to the small Massachusetts town where we'd grown up, taking a job as an assistant manager at a boutique hotel. Every day, she checked in guests, smiled politely, and dealt with complaints about room service and towel shortages. Everything she'd looked down on, every ordinary job she'd considered beneath her, had become her reality. My parents lost their house. Without my mortgage payments and with Belle unable to contribute anything, the foreclosure was inevitable. They moved into a cramped apartment in a less desirable part of town. My mother stopped posting on social media about her wonderful family. My father's Christmas letter that year was notably brief and free of his usual boasting about his daughter's accomplishments. I heard they tried to reach out to extended family members, cousins and aunts who'd watched Belle be favored for years. But family has long memories. Everyone remembered the times Belle had shown up to weddings and funerals making everything about herself, the times my parents had borrowed money they'd never repaid, the times they'd skipped events because they weren't important enough. The sympathy well was dry. 6 months after the lawyers' meeting, I ran into Belle at a coffee shop near my office. She was in her hotel uniform, grabbing a latte before her shift. She saw me and froze. We stared at each other for a long moment. She looked tired. Not artfully tired, like she used to cultivate for auditions, but genuinely exhausted. There were lines around her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. "Dana," she said finally. "Belle. I saw in the business section that your company just got acquired by a major tech firm. Congratulations. Thank you. I didn't elaborate. The acquisition had been significant, life-changing money that would secure Hazel's future and let Spencer and me finally relax a bit. But Belle didn't need to know the details. Listen, She stopped, swallowed. I know I can't undo what I did. I know you probably hate me. But I am sorry. About Hazel. About all of it. I studied her face, looking for the manipulation I'd grown so accustomed to, but all I saw was regret and weariness. Maybe it was genuine. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, it didn't change anything. I appreciate you saying that, I said, but apologies don't erase harm, and I have to protect my daughter. That's always going to come first. I understand. She looked down at her cup. For what it's worth, I get it now. What you were trying to tell me. I didn't want to see it. Maybe someday you'll figure out who you are without an audience to perform for, I said. It wasn't cruel, just honest. I hope you do, Belle. I really do. I left her there and walked back to my office, where I had a meeting with a nonprofit that wanted to hire us to build a platform for connecting foster children with resources. Meaningful work. Work that mattered. That evening, Spencer and I took Hazel to her piano recital. She'd been taking lessons for a year now, and she was finally confident enough to perform in front of an audience. We sat in the second row of the small auditorium, watching her climb onto the bench, adjust her position, and begin to play. She made a few mistakes, but she didn't let them derail her. She kept going, and when she finished, she looked out into the audience and found us. The smile on her face was pure joy. Later, after we'd celebrated with ice cream and tucked her into bed, Spencer and I sat on the porch of our home with glasses of wine, watching the sun set over the Charles River. You know what Belle said to me today? I told him about the coffee shop encounter. Do you believe she meant it? The apology? I don't know, and honestly, it doesn't matter. I didn't cut her off to punish her or teach her a lesson. I did it to protect Hazel and to stop letting toxic people drain my energy. Whether Belle learns anything from this is her problem, not mine. Spencer took my hand. I'm proud of you. I know that wasn't easy. It was easier than I expected, in the end. Once I stopped caring about their approval, stopped trying to make them see my worth, it all became very simple. They don't get access to my daughter. They don't get my money. They don't get my time or my energy or my peace of mind. To boundaries, Spencer said, raising his glass. To boundaries, I echoed. And to choosing the family we want, not the one we were born into. The next year brought changes I never could have anticipated. The acquisition of my company meant I could be more selective about projects, focusing on work that aligned with my values. Spencer and I strengthened our relationship, going to couples therapy not because we were struggling, but because we wanted to build the healthiest partnership possible. And Hazel blossomed. She joined a youth theater group, made close friends, and showed a remarkable talent for creative writing. Her teacher sent home a story she'd written about a brave princess who saved herself instead of waiting for rescue, and I tucked it away in my box of precious things. At her 7th birthday party, surrounded by a dozen friends from school and our chosen family of close friends, and Spencer's relatives who'd welcomed us with open arms, Hazel blew out her candles and made a wish. What did you wish for? One of her friends asked. I can't tell, or it won't come true, Hazel said solemnly. But later, when I was tucking her in, she whispered to me, I wished that I could always be this happy. You deserve to be, baby, every single day. I know, she said, with the simple confidence of a child who finally, truly believed she was loved and valued. You told me that, and you were right. 6 months later, I was invited to speak at a Women in Tech conference about building businesses with integrity and work-life balance. I almost declined. Public speaking had never been my strength, and talking about my personal life felt exposing. But Spencer encouraged me. You have a story that could help other people, he said. People who are trapped in toxic family dynamics and don't know how to get out. People who are sacrificing themselves and their children to keep the peace. So I accepted. I stood on that stage in front of 300 women and told my story. Not all of it, but enough. I talked about the culture of obligation that tells us family comes first no matter what. I discussed the difference between supporting someone and enabling them. I shared how cutting off financial ties to toxic relatives had freed up resources to invest in my daughter's therapy, my own therapy, and building a life that reflected my values rather than my family's expectations. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. But what struck me most was the line of women who approached me afterward, some with tears in their eyes, sharing their own stories of parents who manipulated them, siblings who exploited them, relatives who used guilt as a weapon. How did you find the courage? One woman asked. How did you stop feeling guilty? I realized that guilt was just a tool they used to control me, I said. And I asked myself, if my daughter was in this situation, what would I want her to do? Would I want her to keep sacrificing herself for people who didn't respect her? The answer was obvious. I deserved the same protection I wanted for her. The woman nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Thank you. I needed to hear that. Driving home that night, I thought about Belle's question from the coffee shop. Did I hate her? The answer was no. Hate required energy and engagement I no longer wanted to give. I felt something closer to pity and a distant wish for her to find peace, but from a safe distance. I thought about my parents, growing old in their small apartment, the consequences of a lifetime of favoritism and poor choices finally catching up to them. I felt sad for them, but not obligated. They'd made their beds with remarkable consistency over decades. And I thought about Ryan, Belle's son, who was now learning what it meant when the money runs out and the people you counted on have their own limits. I hoped someone in his life would teach him better lessons than his mother had, but that wasn't my responsibility. My responsibility was to the girl asleep in the back seat, her head tilted against the window, clutching the participation ribbon from her spelling bee. My responsibility was to the man beside me, who'd stood by me when I'd made the hardest choice of my life. My responsibility was to build a life defined by love and respect, rather than obligation and guilt. The room isn't just for family, Belle had said, wielding those words like a weapon to make a 6-year-old feel unwanted and less than. She was right, in a way. But she'd misunderstood what family meant. Family isn't just the people you're born to. Family is the people who show up, who choose you every day, who celebrate your successes and comfort your failures, who would never leave a child crying in a hallway for 3 hours to prove a point. Family is what you build when you finally have the courage to walk away from people who only tear you down. And as I pulled into our driveway, looked up at the lights in our home, and felt the bone-deep peace of knowing I'd made the right choice, I understood something I'd been too afraid to acknowledge before. I hadn't lost my family when I set those boundaries. I'd finally found it. Years from now, Hazel will ask me about Aunt Belle, about what happened, and why we don't see that side of the family anymore, and I'll tell her the truth, age-appropriately and without venom. I'll tell her that sometimes people we love hurt us, and loving them doesn't mean accepting that hurt. I'll tell her that she deserves to be surrounded by people who cherish her, not tolerate her. I'll tell her that the most important thing I ever did wasn't building a successful company or making smart investments. It was choosing her. Choosing her safety, her happiness, her right to grow up knowing she was valued. And if that meant losing people who called themselves family but acted like strangers, then so be it. The room is for family, Belle had said. She just never understood that she'd excluded herself the moment she decided my daughter wasn't worthy of basic human kindness. Some rooms are worth protecting. Some boundaries are worth maintaining. Some chapters are worth closing. And some families are worth choosing, while others are worth leaving behind.